Hi, welcome to the webinar, How to Recognize and Prevent Eating Disorders in Adolescents and Young Adults. I am Allison Ash, and I'm going to be talking to you today about this important topic, and I'm just glad that you've joined me. So I'm going to jump in by sharing my screen and talking a little bit about the agenda for the day. If you want to be checking out my website, you can do that at allisonash.com. I want to tell a little bit about my story and how I came to do this work. And also, then we'll be talking about eating disorders, the prevalence and seriousness of eating disorders, and recognizing them among people. Then some prevention strategies, some support strategies and resources, and then want to end by talking a little bit about a new initiative that I'm starting called the Parents Eating Disorder Support. And that's going to be launched in the middle of February. So I'll be sharing that at the end of my presentation. So a little bit about me. I have a Bachelor of Arts in Music. That's my education. I also did a Master of Divinity. So I was in pastoral work in churches for about 7 years. Ended up doing a PhD in a School of Behavioral Sciences and Higher Education. Then later in life became a certified eating disorder recovery coach. And my professional background was as an administrator, a dean, and a professor in higher education, adjunct professor. But I have about 30 years working with adolescents and young adults in some different capacities. So that was both in my church work and then also in education, higher education. I even taught private music lessons for a while. So I've worked with a lot of younger people over the years, which is part of the reason why I love doing this work specifically with younger people. But I also have a preteen and teenage daughter. So I think that qualifies me perhaps more than anything in my education or background. I do want to start out also by just saying I'm not a licensed therapist. I am a certified eating disorder recovery coach. I have my PhD from a behavioral sciences school. But my actual work, I am not a licensed therapist. So just want to say that if you do need medical or mental health help, to get that from a mental health professional or medical care from a doctor. So I want to tell a little bit about my story. So my story involves a part of my recovery that is very dear to my heart. I was going along in life in higher education, feeling like I was on a trajectory, possibly to become a vice president someday of an institution, maybe even a president someday if I aspired that high. But my story took a turn when I ended up having a pretty traumatic experience in my 40s that developed into PTSD. And my response to that was developing an eating disorder, specifically anorexia. I wasn't sure if I was going to survive that eating disorder. And I had a pretty unique perspective to have had an eating disorder later in life and having had a lot of education, having worked with a lot of younger people, a lot of my career who had been struggling with eating disorders. So I understood that from an objective, more professional standpoint. But then to be a patient myself and be struggling that way has given me, I think, a different perspective than what I've seen from others, which has led me into what I'm doing now. So I am doing this work now full time. I was in higher ed, like I said, for about 15 to 20 years and am taking this big shift, but I know it's really what I want to do with my future and my life. So why eating disorder recover specifically? I want to talk a little bit about some statistics. So anorexia specifically has the highest mortality rate of any mental illness. Individuals with anorexia, their risk of suicide is 18 times higher, and about 9% of the US population will have an eating disorder in their lifetime. So it is quite prevalent, more than what we often realize. 15% of women will suffer from an eating disorder, and 73% of those will never receive treatment, which is another reason that I am motivated to spread this message and to spread awareness so people can get the help they need. This is an interesting statistic, and I think very important for us to realize that fewer than 6% of people with eating disorders are medically diagnosed as underweight. There are often stereotypes, stigmas, perceptions that we have of individuals with eating disorders. And one of those is that they might be thin, to the point where you can just look at somebody, or they might have a body type that you can say they clearly have an eating disorder. And that's not the case. People can have eating disorders of all different shapes and sizes. And that's an important thing to remember when we're helping individuals. So recognizing eating disorders, I want to start by talking about some of the most common eating disorders that there are, and that is anorexia, bulimia, binge eating disorder, ARFID, which is avoidant restrictive food intake, and orthorexia. And I'm talk about orthorexia in a minute. That's not in the DSM-5, so it's not an official diagnosis in the mental health field, but it is something that we're seeing rising, and it might possibly be a diagnosis someday. But let's start with anorexia. Anorexia, the characteristics are an intense fear of gaining weight, a distorted body image, severe restriction of food intake, weight loss, and excessive exercise. Some of the behaviors that we might see from individuals who are struggling with anorexia are extreme calorie counting, denying hunger even when there are clearly visible signs of hunger, wearing baggy clothes to hide weight loss, and also often complaining of being cold and warm temperatures when individuals' body fat gets to the point where it's so low that they tend to not be able to handle extreme cold very well. And then bulimia. Bulimia is characterized as cycles of binge eating followed by vomiting. Excessive exercise, that's another way of purging through exercise. Misuse of laxatives to prevent weight gain. And often there is a maintenance of a normal body weight. So this is one of those eating disorders that is often invisible. And I will say even anorexia, when there is often a lower weight, that can also be invisible because of the way that people's bodies might present themselves. We might not always see and understand that somebody's underweight. And specifically with other eating disorders, there's not always a weight component to it. Some of these behaviors are signs of vomiting, large amounts of food disappearing or hoarding food, fatigue or dehydration from purging behaviors. And then binge eating disorder. This is characterized by episodes of eating large quantities of food in a short time. So feeling of loss of control, and there's typically not purging. So this is different than just an occasional, wow, I ate too much, or I really wanted that food, and so I just had more than I probably should have. This is really characterized by this happening quite often. So it's eating large quantities of food in a short period. Guilt, shame, or distress after eating. And then eating alone due to embarrassment about food consumption and hiding food or empty wrappers. These last 2 points I think are important because this again points to more than simply I've eaten too much, I'm feeling uncomfortable, or sometimes I just eat more dessert than I want, or sometimes I eat more food. It's really when it becomes an issue and a problem and more of a disorder, when there's a secrecy to this, where people might not even be eating a full dinner with their loved ones because they're embarrassed about eating with people. And then that hiding food and hiding wrappers is really part of that shame that goes along with this disorder. And then this is an eating disorder that's not quite as common or well understood, and it's avoidant restrictive food intake disorder. This is really often just avoidance or restriction of certain foods. Often people with this challenge have sensory sensitivities. There might be a mental health component to a fear of choking, sometimes just a lack of interest in eating. And that does result in nutritional deficiencies or weight loss. So some of the behaviors are picky eating that goes beyond typical preferences. So refusing whole food groups, refusing to eat almost anything that other people are eating. And then there's also a fear behind that. So fear-based avoidance of food. And often, like I said before, that fear of choking or maybe a fear of illness. So there's this restricted food intake because of those fears. And then this last one, orthorexia. This is a newer disorder. And like I said, it's not in the DSM-5, so it's not officially diagnosed. But we are seeing this more, and that's an obsession with eating healthy or clean foods. So an excessive fear about the quality. So there might be an individual who is monitoring every single additive and every single thing that's in a food. And they will say, I simply cannot eat anything processed. And then that can start to snowball to the point of that just becoming more and more restrictive. So some of those behaviors are the signs of emotional distress when eating foods that are perceived as unclean or unhealthy, which really leads to an individual not being able to have a lot of choices in eating. And then obsessive thoughts about finding foods to eat that are healthy. So I want to talk for a second now about prevention strategies. And this is one of my favorite things to talk about because I do believe that we can create families and communities that have a higher likelihood to have individuals that are not struggling with eating disorders. And some of the things I'm going to share with you are not that hard. Sometimes we just don't know because we're not mindful of these challenges. So I'm going to start out by talking about perceptions and behaviors about food and body image and how we can all participate in that in positive ways. And then also talk about the importance of educating others about eating disorders, and then ending by engaging about social media content. So what do we see in social media? So this first category, perceptions and behaviors about food and body image. All of these points, I wish I could do an actual seminar on every single point here, and maybe I will someday because they're all so important. And I think we can all think about how prevalent these kinds of behaviors are all around us. It's kind of like we're swimming in some of these challenges about body and food and numbers. So the strategy for preventing is avoid numbers. So avoid talking about weight, calories consumed, or calories burned. The individuals that I work with, I can't tell you how often I will speak with an individual recovering specifically from anorexia. That's who I work with the most. And they will say in their recovery, when their family are all a part of that and understand, even then at the dinner table, they will have family members talking about calories and food and talking about, well, I'm glad I can eat this because I burned this many calories. And what that does is it just creates this idea that we need to be constantly worrying about a diet culture, constantly restricting, making ourselves smaller, and being consumed and obsessed with that. So avoiding numbers is a key to that. And then avoiding excessive discussion about food and food amounts. Wow, that's a lot of food on your plate. Or even about ourselves, like, oh, I ate way too much food. It's especially for individuals who are more prone to an eating disorder or who definitely are recovering from an eating disorder. That kind of discussion is not helpful and can really be triggering. Definitely avoiding words like fat or skinny. I remember I had a professor in science class was talking about cells, and he was talking about skinny and fat cells just kind of in general. And he had images up on the board. He's like, look at that's a big, huge fat cell, and that's a really, really skinny cell. And I just remember even as a 20-something-year-old thinking, this was long before I was aware like I am now, but just thinking that's just not helpful to be using those words. And I remember it kind of rubbing me the wrong way. And that's especially, like I said before, people who are in recovery, hearing those words is not helpful and can be quite triggering. And then for those of us who want to support people who are struggling with an eating disorder or who are recovering, focusing on your personal growth and relationship with food and body. I can't tell you how often I really want to meet with a whole family. And when my clients allow me to do that, I do. We'll meet and work with a whole family to say, let's talk about not necessarily diving into each family member's relationship with food, but talking about the importance of every person in the family related to food and body. And then avoiding binary categories about healthy versus unhealthy food is a very important thing as well. And then promoting discussion about food purpose. I'm going to talk about these last two here in a second. So avoiding the healthy, unhealthy category, and then food purpose and body functions. Of everything that you see on this screen right now, the strategies to prevent eating disorders, I think probably people using the word healthy and unhealthy in ways that are unhelpful is probably one of the most difficult aspects of eating disorder recovery that we see. So really avoiding those binary categories is key. And I want to talk a little bit about something that I did with my children when they were younger, but I like to use an example of how to promote food purpose with body function. I did this in my own recovery, and I think this is an excellent thing for families to do. And the younger the children, the better, I think. But it's really talking about how different foods that we eat are critical and important for different functions of our body. There are foods like I use the word lipids instead of fats because of sometimes the triggering word of fat or fats, but fats like oils and butter and things that are really important for our body. Our body and our brain needs that. So I remember saying to my kids, do you want to have really shiny hair? Make sure we have some good lipids in our diet. If we want to have strong bones and teeth, we need calcium. If we want to have strong muscles so that we can lift heavy things and run, we need to have protein. And if we want to have energy so we can go play outside, swing, play with our friends, we need to have carbohydrates. So as you look at these categories, I'm going to put some foods up here on the screen, and I want you to think about, have you had times in your life when you have heard somebody mention a food that you're going to see? So butter on popcorn is a lipid, yogurt is calcium, carbohydrates, bread, and then protein, eggs, and chicken. Have you ever had somebody call any of those foods unhealthy? Right? Where we would say that is an unhealthy food. You need to eat healthy food. But I want to say this category of fun, it's something that I did with my children as well. And I do this with my clients to talk about, have we ever heard somebody say eating cake is unhealthy? But we need to enjoy food. There are times when we're going to have food that's simply enjoyable. And the way that we prevent this culture of dieting and this culture of eating disorders is to stop using these binary categories of, well, birthday cake, yeah, I guess you can have it at this birthday party, but it's unhealthy. So go eat your healthy food. So now you can have unhealthy food. It's almost like saying eating this food that we would say like butter on popcorn is really a bad thing. It's never going to be good. So as long as you're really good first, then you can be bad later by eating this unhealthy food. But promoting a culture where we are free from eating disorders and diet culture is really saying all food is good food. And think about if an individual said, I'm never going to have unhealthy food, so I'm never going to have birthday cake. And any birthday party they ever went to, they never had birthday cake, right? Would we say that's healthy? That's probably not a mental healthy response. So when we think about health and unhealth, going beyond what a food has typically been thought of in a diet culture is very important for our mental health and to prevent eating disorders. I also like to talk to people about educating about eating disorders and social media content. So when we have older children, or even if we're in a mental health profession where we have clients, discuss the prevalence and the dangers of eating disorders and educating family members. Okay, this is a really important one. So around holiday gatherings, this is not easy to be able to say to family members. And sometimes I think it's helpful before to say, I know a lot of times when we gather around a big meal, we talk about food because there's so much of it and everybody talks about calories and I'm so full. I would love it if we could just not talk about the amount of food, the calories, or bodies, like big or small. If we could be free from that. And honestly, a way to do that is to educate your family members about the prevalence of eating disorders. So it's okay to say, I don't know if you know this, but anorexia has the highest mortality rate of any mental illness. And I want to make sure my children, my young children, and even people who are not young, I want to make sure that we have a culture where we're not promoting that. So if we could just, when you're around my children or when you're in this environment, if we could just hold off from talking about that. Of course, you do what you want with your friends and in your time, but when my kids are there, I would appreciate us not doing that because I really want to do everything I can do to promote a healthy way for them to understand their body and food. There's a current focus among girls and young women about stomach and thigh gap. Now, this has not been just now, but I have a whole thought, and I would love to write a book someday specifically about the obsession that our society in particular has about stomach, and the thigh gap is gaining some not helpful popularity as well. And it's this idea that there are bodies that are specifically meant to be the model of perfection. And anybody who wants to be loved or attractive needs to fit that perception. And that is just simply not true, as we know, but educating about that. So that's why I have this in this category. I think it's really helpful to educate our young people and say, have you heard this? Have you heard like how people are obsessed with like a flat stomach or a thigh gap? I'm sure you've heard that. You know what? That is not helpful because that's not even possible. There are standards that are out there that some body types simply are not made that way. And so I don't know if you've seen that, but I just want you to know what I think about that. When we talk to our children or even our clients about that, that can go a long way in educating. And I just like to say too that it's never too late, right? It is never too late to start talking about this. So, and to start educating and to start these kinds of ways to get away from diet culture. So even if we're saying, my kids are grown or gosh, I've made some of these mistakes in the past, it's okay to say, I just went to this workshop today and I just learned some things. And I think I might have not always been as helpful as I could have. And I want to talk now about what I think about these things. And you don't have to respond if you don't want, but I just want you to know what I think. It's never too late to do that. So I want to switch now to support strategies and talk a little bit about this analogy that I have of an iceberg. Okay. So how I have come to understand eating disorders, I like to think of it as like an iceberg. And the eating disorder is what we see, we meaning those of us who are looking at someone else and seeing their life, their behaviors, their actions, maybe the eating disorder we can see on the surface of their life. And I put on here that the statement, it's not only about food, because the eating disorder that we see, those behaviors often are about food, right? That's how they're presenting themselves. But underneath those behaviors, underneath those that maybe a person's body changing or the behaviors we see are the reasons, right? They're the emotions behind, and often there are traumas that come along with eating disorders. So really understanding what is underneath that is so important. Now, that's not necessarily our job to fully understand a person when we're helping them. What the reason I have this here is to understand that that is there, that there are individuals who are struggling with things beyond just the eating. And one of the reasons that I think this is critical to talk about is because of the way that people will often think when they're watching somebody recover from an eating disorder, let's say anorexia, and let's say an individual is starting to restore their weight. Somebody might say, oh, I see here on the surface that they're better. They're getting better. Maybe this iceberg that's coming out on the top is that part of it's gone, and I'm not seeing that anymore. But underneath are all of those other reasons, emotions, and traumas. And often the person will actually feel worse when they look better. And another analogy, I love analogies. So another analogy that I've used, this was from my own process in my recovery. I journaled about this, and it was thinking about a football field. We're coming up on the Super Bowl, so I thought this would be a good analogy. I'm thinking about a football field, okay? On the left where you see red where it says sickness, on the right is blue and it says recovery. So on the left of the field, going from the left to the right is the 50-yard line on a football field. And that part, we might get to the 50-yard line and say we're behavior free. We have no more eating disorder behaviors. Maybe my weight is restored. Maybe everything has leveled out. But then we have the rest of the football field to go to recovery, which is the emotions and the thoughts. So often when a person is looking so much better, they're like, I am basically like only halfway there. And now I have the hard work to do that often people aren't going to be seeing that I'm still doing that hard work, which is often why people relapse, because they're saying, I'm not getting the support that I used to get when I looked sick. And now I look fine and everybody thinks I'm fine. And they're celebrating the fact that I look bigger, which is terrifying. And that's hard. So it really creates this very difficult process of recovering. The reason I start out with that is because for support strategies, I think it's critical that people understand this dynamic. They understand that a person is going to need more support often, a different kind of support, once they have gotten to a point where maybe they look like they're not struggling as much with the eating disorder. So some other support strategies are avoiding accusations. It is so difficult not to get angry with somebody who has an eating disorder, because I know there can be a thought of like, just eat or just stop doing that. Why can't you just stop that? And that is just not going to work. It's not helpful for people. And I just put that right at the top to not be doing that. Avoid phrases that begin with like, how could you be doing this? Like, how could you not eat? How could you be doing this behavior? That often the person struggling is actually asking themselves the same question. How could I be doing this? How is this happening to me? How am I going to get out of this? Why is this happening? And so when people hear other people say to them their own thoughts of shame and guilt, it just puts people down into a deeper place of shame where they're not really going to be wanting to talk to the people and opening up to the people who are saying those things. Helping to make connections between the life they want to live and having a healthy, functioning body is really helpful. So again, this could be done in a way that's not helpful. So let's say there's a young person who's an athlete, right? So saying to a young person, I know how much you love playing basketball, and I want you to do that. I know it's important to you. Let's make sure that your body is in a place that you can do everything you want to do. And how can we help you do that? So that's probably the way to say it. A way not to say it is, how could you do this if you want to play basketball? You're not even going to be able to play anymore, right? There's a difference in tone. So it's important to have the right tone. Describing what you see is helpful as well. I'm concerned. I see you struggling. When I say see, I don't necessarily mean body. Again, we're not going to be talking about body size, numbers, that sort of thing. But you can say things like, I'm noticing you're not eating as much and I'm concerned. I'm noticing that you look distressed. I want to help you. Of course, when we have people that we're responsible for, so when we're a parent and it's our child, we have to be more direct, and there might be ways that we have to be more involved than simply saying what you see, but that's helpful probably for anybody. Noticing your own emotions is absolutely important in this. If we go into a conversation with somebody we love and it's really covered just with anger, and we're just angry at that person, which is a very typical and healthy response for you and yourself, that's not going to be helpful to them. So noticing your own emotions begins with noticing them and then processing them with somebody other than the person you're helping. The person you're helping is able to have their own thoughts, their own emotions, and needs to be able to have your support that goes beyond them now supporting your emotions. Okay. So noticing yours is key. Practice compassion before discussion. Come into a discussion armed with compassion in your heart and in your soul. Having that compassion is going to go a long, long way. I had a client one time say, you know what? All I want to do is have my parents say, I'm so sorry that we have to make you eat this. I'm so sorry. I hate that you're feeling this way. I can't imagine how hard this is. That's what they wanted. Instead of, you need to eat this. Why are you not eating this? How could you be doing this? Come on, that tone, like we talked about earlier. Explain treatment options. So therapy, a medical doctor, dietitian, treatment centers, there
Hey,
are all
baby,
sorts of treatment
are you
options.
looking for me?
Anybody who wants to have a free consultation, you can do that with me. I have ways for you to sign up at the end of the call to have that kind of conversation with me if that would be helpful to you. And then depending on the age and the role that you have, you may need to require treatment. And that really, I can't say this enough, that having a medical doctor be a part of a person's recovery is critical. So when a person is at a stage where you're very concerned about them, or you're even starting to get concerned, having that medical doctor give a diagnosis and or options for understanding the medical place that the person is in is really important. So some of the resources, I'm just going to put these here. These are that are very, very helpful. ANAD.org. This is one of the best resources that I've seen. It has everything you can imagine. A lot of the statistics I use today are on that website. They have all sorts of options and resources there. Like I said before, therapy, a medical doctor, dietitian, a treatment center, eating disorder recovery coach. So at the end here, I'm going to talk a little bit about what I do, and that this is a fairly new phenomenon, eating disorder recovery coaching, but it's really an important part, I think, of people's care because it really involves a lot more customized way of support and a 24/7 kind of approach to eating disorder recovery. There are books for support. I'm going to put one up for in a second. It's a friend of mine who wrote a book about parents and supporting a child with anorexia. All sorts of books. Again, if you want to reach out to me for any of those, feel free to do that. And this is my Instagram and that's my email. And then this is an exciting initiative that I'm beginning on February 15. It's the Parents Eating Disorder Support. So I can't tell you how often I am supporting parents. Often I see that I have a parallel track. I'm supporting the client, the person who's struggling with the eating disorder, but then also supporting the parent. And the parent often needs their own resources for support. So I'm not necessarily going to be the person to be providing weekly ongoing kind of therapy or coaching for them, but I do like to offer places for them to connect with others, places for parents to connect with resources, and to occasionally have a session with me just to understand how can I be helping my child. So that's something that I'm going to be starting in February. This is the book I was talking about, Love, Crowd Out, Forgive, accept, a guide to supporting a loved one with anorexia. And this is written by a friend of mine. And his daughter actually wrote, the one who was struggling, wrote part in this book as well. So you get to hear directly from her and her experience and her perspective. So I just want to end by talking a little bit about Allison Ash Recovery Coaching, which is my business. And that is, it's really a new approach to eating disorder recovery. It's a customized approach. So when I meet with individuals, I customize their treatment. I have a whole set of worksheets and different resources that I have and exercises that I do with people. I have a virtual whiteboard that I'm going to show you here in a second, and it's 24/7 support. What I mean by that is that you actually have access to me to text anytime. I don't respond 24/7 because I do sleep and I do other things as well, but I do see text during the day, typically in a pretty timely manner, and can respond to that. I know that eating disorders do not take time off. They don't take a day off. They don't take an hour off. A person who is recovering from an eating disorder, I know I did when I was recovering. And so that this kind of support, I think, is it can be critical for people. I also offer and am just starting a new workshop it's called Anorexia Recovery for Therapists. So from a professional who was also a patient. So that's me. So that is a training that I can do specifically for therapists. That's a free training right now. I am still offering that for free. That might change in the future, but I'm still able to offer that for free right now to therapists who are interested in that. So this again is a way for you to sign up for a free consultation. That's my website. That's my email. I do want to just show you really quickly the whiteboard that I use with my clients so you can see and understand how I work with my clients. So this is every client that I get and that I have has their own virtual whiteboard. So they have a way of engaging with me. So I'm just going to show you a little bit about an exercise that I do when a person has this link to a whiteboard. We together will be writing on these sticky notes. So this is one of the first exercises I do with clients to say, with your eating disorder, a lot of times people say they feel safe and they feel comfort. Tell me what you feel. So a person might say, I feel comfortable. So they might actually type that word in, and then they might say, I feel free. And then we go through and do this exercise together. And at the end of our time together, often at the end of our 12 weeks or even beyond, if I scroll out here, you can see all of the different exercises that we do, and people will have a board full of these exercises that they have and reminders that they can take with them forever. I don't take this board away. They can have this in their own process later if they want to do that. So I'm just going to pause there and just open it up for questions, but I am going to stop the recording now so that those of you who want to ask questions can do that without knowing that you're being recorded. So I'm going to stop the recording and then we'll take questions. All right, thank you.